unanimous consent to end the quorum call.
Without objection.
There's been a lot of confusion and outright misinformation about some proposed arms sales to our Gulf partners, specifically Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. I'm grateful for the opportunity this morning to clear up a few things, especially considering the current high stakes in the region. As many of you probably have heard, the Islamic Republic of Iran just this morning has shot down an American surveillance aircraft over the Strait of Hormuz. And yet another act of reckless, unprovoked aggression targeting lawful behavior on the high seas and in the skies. Now, I know that for some of my colleagues here, Iranian acts of violence are always to be excused, are somehow always the fault of America, and especially of the Trump administration, to which the only appropriate response is to continue to appease the Ayatollahs, to send them pallets of cash, as the last administration did, and give them billions of dollars in relief for sanctions, essentially to say, pretty please, stop your acts of terroristic aggression and imperial ambition throughout the region. It's my duty to inform all those colleagues that this is dangerous and misguided thinking. Iran, as it did in the mid-1980s, will meet American restraint with continued aggression. It'll watch the outcome of today's votes and support it for our friends in the Gulf for signs of resolve or weakness. I urge my fellow senators to send the right message to Tehran. The administration plans to sell roughly $8 billion in arms to our Gulf partners so they can defend themselves, as well as the many thousands of Americans within their borders, all from Iranian aggression. Canceling those sales would not only endanger Americans overseas and deprive American industry of billions in exports, it would weaken some of the only countries in a position to effectively resist Iran's violent rampage throughout the Middle East. Now, we've heard many objections to these arms sales. First, and most amazing, given the stakes, some Democrats object for procedural reasons. They're upset that the administration is proceeding over an informal hold placed by the senior senator from New Jersey. In doing so, they claim that the administration is violating a long tradition of honoring informal holds by the chairman and ranking members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. They're saying, in effect, let's block arms sales to our allies in an emergency because the Secretary of State hurt the feelings of a few senators. But the actual purpose of those holds, only a courtesy, not a rule, not a law, is to give those senators time to fully examine a proposal and to foster engagement between the Senate and an administration in good faith. But that's not how this hold was being used. These arms sales have been held for more than a year. More than a year. How much time does the senator from New Jersey need to make up his mind? How many times does the Secretary of State have to call him and meet with them? How many briefings do they have to provide? How many memos do they have to send? This is not a request for more information. We're trying to work together in good faith. This was a stalling tactic through and through. It's yet another example of the Democrats engaged in psychological projection, accusing this administration of violating norms, when in fact they are the ones that have been violating long-standing, unwritten rules, customs, and norms. The administration is moving forward with this sale by making an emergency declaration as provided by law and as presidents have done many times in the past. President Reagan proceeded with sales of air defense systems to, yes, Saudi Arabia, using this very same provision. President George H.W. Bush did so as well, selling tanks and fighter aircraft to, yes, Saudi Arabia. But even without this precedent, can there be any doubt that our partners in the Gulf are facing a genuine emergency as they fend off Iran? Oil tankers flying flags of our allies and partners are ablaze in the Gulf of Oman. Civilian airports, oil pipelines, and American surveillance aircraft have all come under rocket attacks from Yemen's terror proxy in Yemen. Make no mistake, this is a genuine emergency, but too few of my colleagues are willing to see the plain facts. They want to talk about anything that will change the subject from Iran and its campaign of aggression throughout the Middle East. A second objection: some argue that our Gulf partners are somehow beneath our support. Really? It was the United Arab Emirates, after all, that hosted Pope Francis earlier this year, where he conducted a mass for Christians in that nation. The Kingdom of Jordan is another important friend caught in the crossfire of this debate. Jordan has been a reliable and trustworthy partner of the United States for many years, and today it bears the brunt of the refugee crisis and chaos created by Assad's Iran-backed butchery in Syria. And while Democrats try to frame this vote as a support for our Gulf partners alone, let's not forget that numerous other strong allies of the United States would be affected by these votes as well. Countries like the United Kingdom and France and South Korea and Israel, all part of the supply chains affected by these deals. Rejecting these sales will hurt them too, and now is not the time to be rejecting our friends. Now, of course, you couldn't make any of these observations about the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is about as likely to host the Pope as it is to host a pride parade. Lost in the criticism of our partners is a much more worthy discussion about the elaborate architecture of torture and repression supervised by Ayatollah Khamenei, who is personally responsible for American citizens being held in appalling captivity for years at a time. One such American citizen, Bob Levinson, has been missing in Iran for more than a decade. The same media and politicians who trumpet every misdeed of America's steadfast partners in the region, regardless of whether such misdeeds are fact or fiction, strangely silent about the undisputed fact that Iran has the blood on its hands of more than 600 American troops in Iraq in the last decade. 600 Americans were killed at the hands of Iran. Yet we propose to deny arms sales to some of the only countries that are committed to resisting Iran's blood-stained anti-American theocracy. It's time to get our priorities straight. Third, still other critics fault our Gulf partners for their involvement in the civil war in Yemen, as though they're the aggressors in Yemen, rather than states that were pulled into a conflict to push an Iranian armed rebel group off of the Arabian Peninsula at the request of the government of Yemen with the support of the United Nations. Evidently, some of my fellow senators would counsel our Gulf partners to do nothing, as a rebel group armed by their sworn enemy plunged a neighboring country into chaos, shooting rockets at their airports and oil pipelines. That would indeed be quite the restrained foreign policy. Some might also call it the height of stupidity that we would never tolerate for our own citizens. And as to the appalling human rights conditions in Yemen, I think the current U.S. ambassador to Iraq, Matthew Toller, said it best to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, indeed. Quote, almost 100% of the humanitarian catastrophe in Yemen has been caused by the Iranian-backed Houthis. Almost 100%. Mr. Toller is not some Trump appointee. He's not some partisan hack. He is a career Foreign Service officer who served as ambassador to Yemen under, yes, President Obama. If there is anyone in the United States government who is in a position to know what's going on in Yemen and who is to blame for the carnage in Yemen, it's the man on the ground rather than politicians in Washington. Now, underlying this whole debate is a romantic wish, a naive delusion that our foreign policy can always be pristine, requiring no compromises whatsoever, no acknowledgement of the messy facts around the world, or even that we could flee away from that messy, complicated, dangerous world entirely, relying solely on the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans to keep us safe. A cursory review of history proves that neither option is available. A cursory review of newspaper headlines proves it too. Our main adversary in the Middle East, the Islamic Republic of Iran, is a revolutionary power dedicated from its inception 40 years ago to the destruction of Americans and indeed America itself. They don't try to hide it. Death to America is their slogan, and they chant it all the time. Our departure from the field will not dissuade the Ayatollahs from that purpose. It will only embolden them, as will the abandonment of our allies in the region. Madam President, I yield the floor, subjects the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Madam President,
Senator from Kentucky.
the arms industry
Senate's in a quorum.
ask unanimous consent that we vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
The arms industry is a unique industry. It's not like making shoes or apparel. It's not like selling watches. You're selling things that are, when used properly, kill other people. They're deadly weapons that we have. We've accumulated the technology by the taxpayer paying for this. So we have helicopters, planes, guided missiles. We're able to refuel planes. It is not a jobs program and is not something that we willy-nilly give weapons to everyone. So we don't sell weapons to Russia. We don't sell weapons to China because we have disagreements and we don't think it would be in our best interest to sell them weapons. We also don't sell weapons typically to people we think are untrustworthy. I think there's every evidence that Saudi Arabia would be put in that category. When you have direct evidence and when our own intelligence community has concluded that there is high confidence that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia butchered a dissident with a bone saw in a consulate in a foreign country, you would think that would give us pause as to giving Saudi Arabia or selling Saudi Arabia more weapons. But it's worse than that. We're not only selling Saudi Arabia offensive weapons, we are also talking about giving them nuclear technology. Now, the nuclear technology, they say, is only for energy. But you got to wonder, a country that sits atop one of the largest oil reserves in the world is now saying, oh, we don't have enough fossil fuel, we need nuclear power. There have been people who have gotten nuclear technology and then have moved on to nuclear weapons. What would possibly be the worst thing to happen to the Middle East would be to have three powers there with nuclear weapons. We've had Iran before. They have the knowledge now to enrich. They made an agreement not to enrich. They're still threatening to enrich uranium. What do you think happens if Saudi Arabia gets nuclear technology and there's any rumor of them progressing on towards developing nuclear weapons? What will Iran do? Automatically, they will do the same thing. It also happens in the conventional weapons arena. So every time we sell or give missiles to Saudi Arabia, what do you think Iran does? They've either got to buy more or make more. It's an arms race. We're feeding both sides of an arms race. But you'll hear people in Washington saying, but Iran they are a malign influence. Well, yeah, so's Saudi Arabia. What do you do when you have two powers that show tendencies towards evil and show tendencies towards acting in ways that are against our national interests? Do we just give blindly weapons to anybody who's opposed to Iran because Iran is a malign influence? Well, what about Saudi Arabia? They've spent $100 billion spreading this radical jihadism to other cultures. $100 billion around the world, preaching hatred of Christians, hatred of Jews, hatred of Hindus, and yet we give them more weapons. There's a madrasa supported by Saudi Arabia. This is a so-called religious school in Pakistan that 80% of the boys that graduate from the school, because of course girls aren't allowed to go to school under this kind of religion, the boys that graduate from the school, 80% of them fight in the Taliban against the United States. Why would we give weapons to a country that teaches hatred of our country and actually trains fighters to fight against our soldiers? What person in what insane world thinks it's a good idea to fund people who fundamentally don't like us? Why in the world do we keep doing this? Last week we voted on sending weapons to Qatar. Do you know who Qatar supplies weapons with? Hamas. I thought we were allies with Israel, but we fund Qatar that sends missiles and weapons to Hamas, who then bombs Israel. Qatar also hosts fundraisers for ISIS. Remember ISIS? The ones chopping people's heads off? Why would we give weapons to countries that give weapons to our enemies? In the Syrian civil war, we went in on the side of those who were opposed to Assad. Now, Assad's no saint, no Democrat, no Jeffersonian Democrat, no believer in freedom, and yet the people on the other side, most of them hate Israel, most of them despise any rights for women, most of them, many of them, are allied with Al-Qaeda. Who's Al-Qaeda? The people who attacked us on 9/11. Al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, ISIS. Who did they get weapons from? Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Even Hillary Clinton admitted this in one of the emails that was released where Hillary Clinton is talking to John Podesta by email. She said, we've got to do something about this. Saudi Arabia and Qatar are arming and providing logistical help to ISIS. So why does it go on? Some would say because people make a big profit on this. This is a jobs program for the arms industry, and we got to make sure they make their profit. I disagree. This is an industry that uniquely has to do with our national interest. It's uniquely paid for by the taxpayer. These weapons are owned by the taxpayer, and we should not sell them to people who are not our friends. This is what the debate's about today. We will vote shortly on whether or not we should sell offensive weapons to Saudi Arabia. What are they doing with the weapons? Well, they're bombing civilians in Yemen, for one. They're transferring some of the weapons in Yemen to Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda, who attacked us, or the larger umbrella group that attacked us on 9/11, is active. They're called AQAP in Yemen. There are news reports in the last week that Saudi Arabia is indiscriminately giving arms to anybody who's opposed to the group that they're fighting against, the Houthis. Who supports the Houthis? The Iranians. Is one side better than the other? Are we so blind to the malign influence of Saudi Arabia that we just give money and weapons to anybody regardless of what they do? You can chop up a dissident, you can cut a dissident into pieces with a bone saw, and we'll still give you weapons? My goodness, I can't imagine. I do not think the people in this body who will vote to continue to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia are listening to the people at home. I guarantee you, if we asked the people at home, if we had a national poll and every voter got to give their opinion, how many people at home do you think are saying, oh, well, they just chopped up a dissident, no big deal, let's keep sending them weapons? Or, oh, well, they're giving weapons to Hamas, yeah, you know, we don't really care. Or, oh, well, they're bombing civilians. The Saudis killed 150 people at a funeral procession, people marching at a funeral procession. They knew it was a funeral procession. This is no fog of war. This is no mistake. This was an intentional act to kill people at a funeral procession. 150 people were killed, 450 were wounded. About a year ago, they killed 40 school children on a school bus. They are indiscriminately bombing civilian centers. They are blockading Yemen, which is one of the poorest countries on the planet. Millions of people, some estimate between 14 and 17 million people, live on the edge of starvation because of this war. The Saudis are preventing food from coming in. They have blockaded Hodeidah, which is one of the key ports where food needs to come in. Yemen imports 80% of their food. The Saudis are blockading them and people are starving, and we are allied with Saudis. We supply them with bombs that they drop on civilians, and until the last few months, we were refueling the very planes that were dropping the bombs. People talk sometimes about, a dream of peace in the Middle East. If you want to have a peace plan in the Middle East, people say, that's Israel and Palestine have to come to a peace agreement. You know what the bigger problem, even bigger than that conundrum, which is a conundrum? It's trying to figure out how to have peace between Saudi Arabia and their allies and Iran. Everything around here is Iran, 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 Iran. Do you know who spends the third most amount of money on the military in the world? Saudi Arabia. It's the United States. We spend more than the next 10 countries combined. We spend more than all the rest of NATO combined, for that matter. So it's the United States, then a distant second is China, and then there's Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia spends more on their military than Russia, more than most of our NATO allies. And yet people say, we got to give them more arms because Iran's a bad actor. Well, what if they're both bad actors? Currently, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf sheikdoms that surround them spend 8 times more than Iran. Now, I'm not saying Iran is this great place or that the government's great. What I'm saying is, when you have 2 bad actors, when you have 2 malign influences, do you think we really always have to choose the lesser of 2 evil? Do we always have to look, askance and say, whatever, as long as we're doing something that is opposed to Iran? One of our other so-called allies over there is Bahrain. We have a naval base there, and we say, it's important to have a naval base, so we have to look the other way. They have 4,000 political prisoners. Saudi Arabia actually imprisons people for political reasons, and they don't just kill them, they behead them and crucify them. I think in that order. They put the bodies out for public display. They executed a guy named Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, who was of a minority religion. The Saudis are Sunnis. This guy was a Shia religious person and a spokesman. He was executed. His nephew is being held in prison, has been for several years now. He was 17 when he was arrested, and his crime, sending a text message to encourage people to protest against the regime, the authoritarian regime of Saudi Arabia. So really, I think the problem here is some people have come to the conclusion that arms are always good and we should never do anything to condition the sale of arms to behavior. Boy, I'm not for sending more arms over there, period, because it's a cauldron always just threatening to boil over. But let's say you or someone who said, no, we've got to arm them. Perhaps we should condition arms on good behavior. Perhaps if you are cutting up a dissident with a bone saw in a foreign country, maybe we should stop arms for a while to see if maybe you can get better people in your government, or maybe to see if your ways will change. Saudi Arabia said, we're doing it differently now. We're not going to fund radical jihadism around the world. But they've spent $100 billion infecting the world with the ideas of hatred of the West, hatred of Christians, hatred of Jews, and hatred of Hindus. There used to be a couple hundred of these schools in Pakistan. There's now said to be 20,000 schools in Pakistan. The Saudis support schools, not just in Pakistan, throughout the world, Indonesia, India, all over the Middle East. They support these schools that teach intolerance and hatred of the West. And yet we're one of their biggest arms suppliers. It makes utterly no sense, and it should be reconsidered. We will have a chance to vote today, and the numbers are growing. When I first introduced a resolution to disapprove of arms sales to Saudi Arabia, I think I got 22 votes. We did it again a couple of months later, I think we got in the 40s. I think there's a chance today that we get close to 60 votes. We'd have to get to 67 to overcome a presidential veto. And look, I'm a big fan of the president on many fronts, but on this, someone's got to stand up, even a member of his own party, and say, arms sales are not jobs programs, and they should be conditioned on behavior, and we should not sell arms to countries who hate us. These countries that burn our flag and chant death to America, we shouldn't be arming them. At one point in time, there were reports that ISIS, you remember the people that were beheading people in the desert in the last couple of years, the people that were spreading throughout the region. There were reports that they had $1 billion worth of American Humvees. Some of them they captured, but some of them became because of this indiscriminate arms, just arms everywhere. So when we had the Syrian civil war going on, all throughout the news media, public and private and everywhere, everybody was saying Saudi Arabia and Qatar are giving arms to anybody, indiscriminately giving arms to people. One of the groups that got arms, and one of the ones that got anti-tank weapons, these are shoulder-launched missiles, said in a news report right after they got them, they said, well, when we're done with Assad, they didn't even talk about ISIS. Most of them didn't care about ISIS because they actually kind of agreed with ISIS's religion. They said, when we're done with Assad, we're going to go after Israel next. So we're arming people that are potential, if not real, enemies of Israel. We're arming people that teach hatred of the West, hatred of Christians, hatred of Hindus, hatred of Jews. And we're arming these people. Why would we do that? Let's say you don't even agree with everything I've said, but you say, well, maybe we should try to get them to behave better. Why don't you withhold arms for 6 months at the least? Why don't we just stop for a while? They already have so many arms. They got enough arms to blow up the Middle East 10 times over. Is there just no stopping? Is there no limitation to what we'll do? Do we not believe that any of our arms sales should be conditioned on behavior? This is a big deal and a big vote. And it's my hope that the American people will watch how people vote and decide, is this who I want representing me? Do I want someone representing me who's selling arms to people who hate our country? To people who spend hundreds of billions of dollars on schools teaching hatred of our country? Do I want to have people representing me who continue to flood the Middle East with arms? That's what this vote is about. And I hope the American public will pay attention to how people vote today and to which direction they want the country to go in. We've had enough war. This is something I agree with the president on. We've had enough war. We've been at war too long in too many places. We've been 19 years in Afghanistan. To what end? I was for the initial purpose of getting those who attacked us on 9/11. I would have voted to go. But after 19 years, it's nation building. We're spending $50 billion a year. We build roads, they blow them up. We build schools, they blow them up. We got roads and schools crumbling in our country. We don't have an extra $50 billion to spend in Afghanistan. We're $1 trillion short this year. We're going to spend $4 trillion and we bring in $3 trillion. Not really great economics, not great budget balancing effort on our part. So one, we can't afford to try to be everywhere all the time. But number two, the money we're spending overseas is counterproductive. You see, we went into Iraq and toppled a dictator, and what did we get? Chaos. In the chaos, we get ISIS and other groups forming. We went into Libya and toppled the dictator in Libya, and what did we get? Chaos. It's now so confusing in Libya that I'm not even sure which side the U.S. government is supporting. They were supporting the UN-sanctioned government, and now they appear to be supporting military generals that are trying to overthrow that government. One thing's for sure, the country of Qatar that we voted to send arms to last week is supporting the side opposite us. So we give arms to people who are directly involved in a civil war where we're involved on the other side of the civil war. To me, it seems utterly preposterous that we keep doing that. Between Qatar's support for the other side in Libya, their support for Hamas, they're letting ISIS and al-Qaeda do fundraising in their country. Maybe we need to take a break from the arms race in the Middle East. I don't think that you can make a practical or reasonable argument that there's been more peace since we've sent more weapons over there. They've got plenty of weapons to kill each other for another 1,000 years. They've been killing each other for 1,000 years. They got enough weapons to kill each other for another 1,000 years. Maybe we don't need to be involved in every civil war in the world. Maybe we can't afford it, and maybe when we've gotten involved, we've had the unintended consequences of actually making it worse. People have this idea that you topple a dictator and somehow the next person they elect is going to be Thomas Jefferson. Well, guess what? Every time we've toppled a dictator, the people they end up electing, it's not Thomas Jefferson. In fact, sometimes when they have elections, we don't like who they elected in the elections, and people go back in and topple them again. So when Egypt actually had an election, they elected somebody from the Muslim Brotherhood. Many in the Middle East and many in our country didn't want it, so we helped to get rid of him. So now we have a military rule with no elections, and with the idea that you can be detained without trial. But people say, well, it's stable, and it's another military autocracy, but we're going to put up with it. I think we need to rethink our approach to the Middle East. I think we need to rethink the approach that we always have to arm one or both sides in every war. We need to rethink whether regime change is a good idea. And we need to look at the practical effects of our foreign policy and say, are we safer somehow? I think the one thing that is universally true is that we're usually poorer by the time we're done, because what we end up doing is spending good money after bad. I'll give you a couple of examples in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, we spend $90 million on a luxury hotel in downtown Kabul. And you say, well, how does a $90 million hotel protect us? Well, it doesn't, but it's money, and money's just running through all of this. Somebody's getting rich, but not the American taxpayer. So the guy that built it was, I think it was a Jordanian national, but he built a shell of a hotel. He took the $90 million, he got all the payment, but it was never built. So it mostly doesn't have walls, and none of the rooms are completed. But it's now a danger because it sits across the street from our embassy, and snipers crawl up in the building. And so the thing is we ask you for $90 million, we need more now, because apparently we need to tear it down because it's now a danger to our embassy and our soldiers. So if we could just get $200,000 more. They're going to spend money. They're going to spend another couple $100,000 tearing down the hotel that we asked you to build in the first place, which we had no business building whatsoever. We built a gas station for them in Afghanistan too, but because our purpose in the military is now sometimes to fight the enemy, but also to fight climate change. You didn't know this, but that's part of the military's goal is climate change now. So we built them a gas station, but we want to reduce the carbon footprint, and so we we got a gas station that sells natural gas. Well, the problem was, one, nobody in Afghanistan has a car. The average income is about $800. Almost nobody's got a car. No one's got one burns natural gas. And so what they did is they had to give them credit cards, and they had to buy them cars that actually run on natural gas. We wanted to visit when we were over there, and the military said it was too dangerous to take us there. So we have no idea whether it's even in operation at this point. But I'd say we need to rethink it, and I urge today a vote against selling more arms to Saudi Arabia. Thank you.
Mr. President.
From South Carolina.
Thank you. I will be voting in support of the resolution of disapproval, and let me tell you why. A strategic relationship with the United States should be coveted. And the difference between a relationship and a strategic relationship is very important. We deal with people all the time that engage in practices that we don't like, abhor, and are against. Sometimes you have to sit down and talk with Putin about Syria. Sometimes you have to sit down and talk with the Chinese, even though they imprison the Uyghurs, and even more egregious examples of the people you have to deal with, because that's part of the world as it is. But when you have a strategic relationship, and we've had one with Saudi Arabia for years, it's different. What brings me here today? I want people in Saudi Arabia. I have many friends there. I value my relationships there. I appreciate all Saudi Arabia has done in the past to work with the United States, militarily and otherwise. But I want to be clear to my friends in Saudi Arabia and really throughout the world. A strategic relationship has certain requirements attached to it. You don't have to run your country like the United States would have you do. You don't have to mirror the United States in terms of your values, but you do have to respect the relationship. And there are certain minimum requirements that I think come with a strategic relationship. Number one, you cannot kill somebody in the most brutal fashion in a consulate of another country, which violates every norm known to the international community, because they wrote a bad article about you. You cannot imprison people and torture them in the fashion that's been going on in Saudi Arabia. You cannot hold the prime minister of another country captive for a period of time to bend them to your will. You cannot rendition people that just simply oppose your views. Terrorism cannot be defined as simple dissent. So the reason I'm voting with Senator Paul and others today is to send a signal to Saudi Arabia that if you act the way you're acting, there is no space for a strategic relationship. There is no amount of oil you can produce that will get me and others to give you a pass on chopping somebody up in a consulate. And did MBS do it? Yes. Not because the UN said so, but because our intelligence and my common sense lead me to believe there is no other viable alternative. You can figure this one out pretty quick. So what happens next? Cannot be business as usual. Saudi Arabia has been a partner. They'll have to be a partner in the future. Shooting rockets into Saudi Arabia from Yemen, supported by the Houthi rebels, Iran supporting the Houthi rebels, bothers me. Defensive armaments I support. But the war in Yemen is out of control. But I'm trying to deliver the strongest message I know how to deliver. Don't take this relationship for granted. And obviously you have. It is disrespectful to the President of the United States to put him in this position. It's disrespectful to all the allies in Congress for you to have put us in this position. Clearly, you don't care that much about this relationship. You care more about the critics and maintaining power at any and all cost. So here's the deal. My relationship with Saudi Arabia is forever changed. And it will not go back to the way it used to be until Saudi Arabia changes its behavior. And the leadership of Saudi Arabia has charted a course that is unsustainable. I reject. And there's no amount of oil can be produced to get me to change my view that our values are more important than oil. We can get oil from other people, but your values come from within. There's no amount of threat coming from Iran that's going to require me to give a pass to this brutal, barbaric behavior. More is expected of a strategic partner. Saudi Arabia doesn't protect the United States from Iran. To believe otherwise is just recasting conditions on the ground. Saudi Arabia has been a partner. I hope they can be in the future. But Saudi Arabia, through their leadership, made a tremendously bad decision. And it's just not Mr. Khashoggi. Until you change in Saudi Arabia, until you embrace the concept that the strategic relationship with the United States is important, therefore I must respect it. I'm not telling you how to run your country. I'm not telling you got to be a Jeffersonian democracy. I respect the right of self-determination by all people, but I will not bless or turn a blind eye to brutality that, in my view, disqualifies a person or a country from being a strategic partner. And if this doesn't do it, what would? If we give this a pass, what's next? So we're going to stand up to the thugs in Iran. We're going to push back against China's cheating. We're going after Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and all the other bad actors on the planet. We're going to work with people we don't like, but when it comes to a strategic partnership, we need to put the world on notice. It comes with a minimum price. And that price is you cannot have a strategic relationship with the United States and behave in a fashion that shows no respect for human dignity, no respect for international norms. You've lost me. and that's too bad. I've been on this floor a lot, standing up for our friends in Saudi Arabia, which has not always been easy to do. But the days of treating Saudi Arabia the way I used to treat them are over. And my hope is that we can find a way to restart this relationship, but it's going to require change. That's why I'm voting in support of these resolutions. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Without objection.
Mr. President, come to the floor again. I urge my colleagues to stand up for Congress as a co-equal branch of government and assert our institutional rights in the arms sales process. I want to thank my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who have joined with me in this effort to bring us here today. As we get ready to vote on these resolutions, I want to again remind my colleagues what's at stake here. At the end of the day, these votes are not about any one president or any one arms sales. There will be someday another president in the White House. There will be another president who will want to claim executive authorities to run over Congress, who will want to use emergency declarations to push through agenda. We in this body must embrace our Article I responsibilities and ensure that we serve as an effective check on whoever that executive is. Regarding these resolutions in particular, we must both assert our role in upholding the rule of law at home and use our position to ensure that when our government seeks to sell weapons, those sales advance our national security interests and our values. It is the Congress that provided the President with the authority to sell arms while retaining strong oversight in the process. And at the risk of getting in the weeds, I want to briefly explain why Secretary Pompeo's 22 emergency certifications don't meet the basic requirements laid out by Congress in the Arms Export Control Act. I'll submit a further statement for the record detailing my statutory concerns. I encourage my colleagues to read it. But first of all, Secretary Pompeo provided us with one single emergency declaration for 22 separate arms sales when the law requires each come with its own individual justification. It's obvious why the Secretary flouted the statute. His bogus emergency doesn't pass the laugh test in general. Furthermore, the Secretary is trying to justify these sales by relying on a section of the Arms Export Control Act, Article 36C, that arguably does not grant him the authority to do what he's even trying to do. Congress made fairly clear back in 2000 that this provision only allows for the United States to make emergency arms sales in very limited situations. For example, to sell arms to NATO partners and other steadfast allies who share our values, like Israel, Australia, Japan. This is a power grab, pure and simple, with lasting implications for the role of Congress in the sale of arms around the world, and we cannot, as an institution, stand for it. Now, let me turn to the proposed sales. As a number of my colleagues and I have already laid out, the administration's argument that this is an emergency, meriting pushing through $8 billion worth of sales to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates simply does not pass muster. It simply does not pass muster. This weapons sales the administration is trying to push through without congressional review will not in any way equip the United States or our allies to better face any imminent threat from Iran. Assistant Secretary of State Clark Cooper admitted as much multiple times last week before the House of Representatives. In one instance, he noted that the administration had been considering this emergency determination for months. In another, he conceded that a majority of these sales will not even be functional or come online for months or even, in some cases, years. So let's take a moment to review why last year I decided to put a hold on a sale of 60,000 precision-guided munition kits. Saudi Arabia, at the helm of a coalition, has used these weapons to devastating effects in Yemen. The two resolutions we'll consider individually relate to the sales of precision-guided munitions and parts. We've heard that these weapons are humanitarian weapons, but when they are used to precisely target civilians, how can we possibly continue to sell them? These are components of bombs that we know have killed thousands of civilians in Yemen, patients in hospitals, children on school buses. In fact, the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project last week released data showing more than 90,000 people have been killed in Yemen since 2015. And the list goes on. Yemen has become a humanitarian catastrophe. 12,000 people have died under the Saudi-led coalition. There's 85,000 children who have died from starvation in Yemen, an incomprehensible moral tragedy. Another 14 million people remain at risk, especially as cholera resurges across the country. This is the challenge we have. It is our bombs that are dropping on those civilians. We cannot morally continue to support such a sale. Secondly, Saudi Arabia, who continues to do this with impunity, also with impunity went ahead and dismembered Jamal Khashoggi, a journalist who was a resident here in the United States. And the gruesome report of the UN Special Rapporteur on this issue is chilling, If the Senate wants to make it very clear that even if you are an ally, you cannot kill with impunity, this is the moment. It's also the moment to tell the UAE, you can't take our weapons and sell it or give it to others who we consider people on the terrorist list. That's going on here too. So I urge my colleagues to stand up for the Constitution, stand up for Article 1 and our rights here, stand up for the Senate's institutional role to ultimately ensure that it has a say on arms sales. Stand up for the proposition that we won't let any ally, simply because they are an ally, kill with impunity a journalist, something that we cherish under our Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the freedom of expression under the First Amendment. And stand up for the proposition that we won't let our bombs fall on innocent civilians and have the moral responsibility which will be a blemish on our history for years to come. This is the moment for the Senate to stand up to its institutional prerogatives. This is the moment for the Senate to stand up for the Constitution. I've heard so many of my colleagues speak of the Constitution. This is the moment. This is the moment to stand up for some moral clarity. This is the moment to send a global message. You cannot kill journalists with impunity. That is the message that we must send to Saudi Arabia. Vote yes on the resolutions of disapproval. Stand up for these propositions, and let's have a moment in which the Senate can be a profile and courage. With that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Idaho.
Mr. President, in just a few moments here, we're going to consider Senate Joint Res 28 through 48, and I want to urge my colleagues to oppose these resolutions and to consider the sales that we're talking about here on their own merits. First of all, let me say what we are not talking about here. We are not talking about the killing of Mr. Khashoggi. That was a murderous act. It was an awful act. It cannot be condoned or tolerated in any way, shape, or form. But that is not what we are voting on here today. Indeed, we hope to bring to the floor eventually a resolution, possibly even a bill, that speaks to that horrific act. Those negotiations have been going on for some time, and we hope to reach a conclusion. But we are not talking about that. What we are talking about here is arms sales that the administration has determined, and we've all been briefed on, are needed because of the current situation in the Middle East. And I want to speak very briefly about very recent events that have been happening as far as Iran is concerned. And Iran is conducting activities that are very worrisome. They are very troubling. When you have these kinds of things happen, it is obvious that a miscalculation can occur. And that is the most worrisome thing here, is that a miscalculation will occur. In any event, these arms sales are needed. To be clear, in the current statute, the administration is within its legal authority to declare an emergency, as stipulated in the Arms Control Export Act passed by this body. the President can act swiftly if he concludes that an emergency exists which requires the proposed sale in the national security interest of the United States. That has occurred. The presidential authority to waive congressional notification was first invoked for the very first time by President Carter in 1979 and has been used on 3 other subsequent occasions. The administration has said that, as in those cases, this is a one-time invocation of the waiver authority in response to an acute threat from Iran. The administration has since returned to the regular congressional notification process for further arms sales, which is in place today. These are sales needed to address the legitimate security requirements of other countries we support in response to numerous threats from Iran and its proxies. These threats are real, as the events over just even the recent 24 hours have shown us. It is important that these countries be ready to assist us, act on their own behalf to counter what Iran has been doing. Yesterday, Iranian-backed Houthi militants struck a Saudi civilian desalination plant with a land attack cruise missile. Last night, Iranian forces shot down a U.S. drone operating in international airspace over the Strait of Hormuz, the 3rd U.S. aircraft they have targeted in recent weeks. Last week, Iran attacked 2 oil tankers traveling near the Strait of Hormuz using limpet mines. Yesterday, German Chancellor Merkel cited strong evidence attributing that attack to Iran. There are very few people in the world who don't know for a fact that it is Iran that has been responsible for all these. On that same day last week, the Iranian-supported Houthis fired a missile at Aba International Airport in southern Saudi Arabia and wounded 26 innocent Saudi civilians. Human Rights Watch denounced this Houthi attack as a war crime. On May 19th, a rocket, likely by Iran proxies, landed near the American embassy in Baghdad. On May 14th, Iran's proxies used drones to strike 2 strategically important Saudi oil facilities. Going back just 2 days earlier, on May 12th, yet 4 more tankers were targeted by Iran while anchored in an Emirati port. Each month, Iranian-sponsored Houthi rebels launch over 15 ballistic missiles and weaponized unmanned aerial systems against Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, posing a significant threat and endangering the lives of 80,000 Americans residing on the Arabian Peninsula. These are just the most recent examples of Iran's destabilizing actions on the world stage. These are serious, serious matters. As I said before, this is worrisome. This is troubling. It is miscalculations of these kinds of things that cause hostilities that have led to very large wars. This thinking that is being done by Iran as they think through these things and as they calibrate them and try to make determinations as what's in their best interest are not going well. If you listen to their public statements, they are making statements that clearly do not coincide with facts. More importantly, they are miscalculating the resolve of the American people. They're miscalculating the fact that they are dealing with President Trump. They are not dealing with a former president. I've talked to the president about this many times. He does not want to go to a war with Iran. The American people don't want to go to a war with Iran. This body does not want to go to war with Iran. Having said that, this president is absolutely committed to protect U.S. lives and U.S. interests, and he will do so. Iran should not miscalculate on that matter. The president is deeply committed to that proposition. Having said that, Iran needs to back away from the edge that it has taken everyone to, and it needs to deal with this matter entirely differently than it's dealing with, or there are going to be dire consequences. In the face of the attacks I've described and the intimidation, our allies have an obligation to develop capabilities to protect their citizens from such threats. These arms sales are an essential part of our effort to help them build those capabilities and to resist Iranian intimidation. I share my fellow senators' concerns about the humanitarian crisis in Yemen and need for all combatants to avoid civilian casualties. This package of sales includes sales of precision weapons, which, when combined with partner efforts to improve intelligence and targeting, will enable those using the weapons to ensure their actions are precise, discriminate, and proportional, and will minimize civilian casualties. The precision munitions in these sales would also prove essential to other countries' efforts to defend themselves from more direct attacks from Iran. Some of us have been briefed by U.S. personnel who have worked specifically with the Saudis to make these improvements. I encourage my colleagues to have similar conversations. If you care about reducing civilian casualties, you should be an enthusiastic supporter of providing these exacting capabilities, which will be transferred pursuant to these sales. These are important for reducing civilian casualties, and we should all support them. In closing, I want to repeat several key points. First, the emergency declaration is legal. Second, these sales are necessary to answer the legitimate security requirements of other nations that work to keep our fellow Americans who work, travel, and live around the world safe. Third, to reject these sales at this time and under these circumstances is to reward recent Iranian aggression and to encourage further Iranian escalation, and most importantly, to encourage miscalculation on the part of Iranians, which will be disastrous if they continue down the road that they're going. For all these reasons, I urge my colleagues to vote against these resolutions. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
To order, the clerk will read Senate Joint Resolution 36 for the third time.
SJ Res 36, joint resolution providing for congressional disapproval of the proposed transfer to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the Kingdom of Spain, and the Italian Republic of certain defense articles and services.
The question occurs on passage in Senate Joint Resolution 36.
Is there a sufficient second?
Is there sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. No. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Cruz. No.
Are there any senators in the chamber wishing to vote or wishing to change their vote? Seeing none, the ayes are 53, the nays are 45, and the resolution is passed. Under the previous order, the clerk will read SJ Res 38 for the third time.